If you don't like living with us, then leave. Those words cut deeper than any blade. To be told by your own flesh and blood to abandon the very home you built with your own hands is a wound that never truly fades. It wasn't just disrespect, it was erasure, an attempt to strip away dignity, history, and a lifetime of sacrifice. From that moment, everything changed. Before we dive into today's story, I recommend you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. If you enjoy this video, type 1 in the comments. If not, type 0 to let me know how I can make better content for you. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. I never imagined that the quiet life I had built after Linda passed would shift so drastically. For 2 years, I had lived in my craftsman-style house on the north side of Boise, tending to the tomato vines and mint patches that my late wife had loved. The home was modest but warm, its oak floors polished by decades of footsteps, its kitchen walls still carrying the recipe card for Linda's apple pie taped up with yellowed masking tape. I thought this house would be my sanctuary in retirement, a place where I could drink coffee on the porch in peace and listen to the wind move through the tall row of cedars. But sanctuaries can change quickly when the doors are opened. My son, Kyle, showed up at my door one gray March morning with his wife, Ava, and their husky, Rocket. He told me he had been laid off from his job at a logistics company and just needed a little time to get back on his feet. "A couple of weeks, Dad, that's all," he said. Ava smiled politely, her phone glowing in her hand, even as she carried in the first suitcase. I didn't think twice about letting them in. Family, after all, is family. Weeks melted into months. The guest bedroom became their bedroom. My living room, once a quiet space where I read Linda's old books, turned into Kyle's gaming den. He sprawled across the sofa for hours, controller in hand, his job search apparently limited to scrolling online and complaining about the pace of the Wi-Fi. Ava set up a ring light near the kitchen counter for her live streams, narrating beauty tips while Rocket barked in the background. When she wasn't broadcasting, she was either shopping online or at the nail salon where she worked part-time. I noticed the utility bills creeping higher. My credit card showed charges for meal deliveries and subscriptions I had never signed up for. They never handed me cash for groceries, yet they ate every dinner at my table. One evening, when I reached for a can of beans I had bought for chili, the shelf was bare, cleaned out by someone else's appetite. At night, Rocket howled at shadows while Ava blasted music in the bedroom. I closed my study door and stared at the photo of Linda on my desk, her soft smile reminding me to breathe. At first, I told myself to be patient. Kyle was my only son, and Ava was his wife. They had hit a rough patch, and I could offer a lifeline. I remembered Linda's voice in the early years of our marriage, urging me to be gentle when Kyle made mistakes. But the gentle patience that worked when he was a teenager began to feel misplaced now that he was 36. Still, I kept biting my tongue, hoping they would announce plans to move out, find their own place, and restore my home to its balance. I stopped inviting friends over. My fishing buddies would call, asking me to join them at Payette Lake, but I hesitated to leave the house unsupervised. Something in me worried that if I left for too long, I might return to a home that didn't feel like mine anymore. I spent evenings tinkering in the garden, the only part of the property that still felt untouched by the invasion of noise and clutter inside. The small irritations stacked one on top of the other. Ava once complained that my old-fashioned stove made it hard to cook, even though she rarely prepared a meal. Kyle borrowed my truck just for errands and returned it with an empty tank and fast food wrappers on the floor. When I brought up the subject of chores, Ava rolled her eyes and muttered that they were guests, not tenants. Guests, I thought, but guests usually bring a bottle of wine, or at least say thank you. Some nights I couldn't sleep. I would wander into Linda's old sewing room, now converted into Ava's makeshift closet, and see expensive shoes piled carelessly against the walls. I wondered how they afforded those when Kyle had no paycheck. The house, once ordered and tidy, began to suffocate me. Even the smell had changed, a mix of dog fur, fast food, and perfume sprays that clung to the curtains. Still, I told myself family deserved grace. It's temporary, I whispered as I made coffee in the quiet mornings before they woke up. It's only temporary. Yet each day stretched that word thinner. 8 weeks had turned into 8 months. The home that had once been my refuge was becoming a place I tiptoed around, careful not to trigger another round of complaints from people who were supposed to be grateful. One evening, I stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the faded apple pie recipe taped to the cabinet. For a moment, I felt Linda's presence, like she was telling me to pay attention. The storm was building. I could sense it in the restless barking of Rocket, in the way Kyle avoided my eyes when I mentioned bills, in Ava's exaggerated sighs when I asked about their plans. My sanctuary was shifting into a battlefield, though I didn't yet know how fierce the coming fight would be. If you're still watching and can feel the weight of that first betrayal, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're with me. The morning had begun like so many others, with the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen and Rocket scratching at the back door. I thought perhaps it was finally the right time to say what had been on my mind for weeks. 8 months of waiting for Kyle and Ava to find their own footing had worn me thin. So I set the table for 3, poured coffee into the mugs, and asked them to sit down. I spoke as evenly as I could. I reminded them that when they first arrived, they said it would only be for a couple of weeks. Now nearly 8 months had passed, and nothing had changed. I told them we needed to discuss a plan, either moving out into their own place or contributing something to the bills. My words were steady, not angry, but the tension in the room was sharp enough to cut. Ava didn't look up from her phone. She tapped out a message with one hand and stirred sugar into her coffee with the other. Then she rolled her eyes dramatically and muttered that I was making everything stressful. Kyle, sitting across from me, drummed the handle of his spoon against the rim of his cup, as if I were a teacher lecturing him. The sound grated against my nerves. Finally, he smirked, leaned back in his chair, and said it. "If you don't like living with us, leave." The words hung in the air like smoke. For a moment, I thought I had misheard. Leave? From my own home? In the kitchen where Linda and I had celebrated birthdays, where her recipe card for apple pie still clung to the cupboard? My hands froze on the table. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the morning air. I asked quietly what he meant. Kyle shrugged as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Ava laughed under her breath and went back to her phone. In that moment, something shifted in me. The father who had always excused his son's laziness, who had swallowed irritation for the sake of peace, was gone. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't storm from the table. Instead, a calm resolve settled in my chest. If they wanted to treat me as a guest in my own house, then I would stop behaving like a host who owed them comfort. I needed to protect myself, my home, and the life Linda and I had built here. The first step would be evidence. Words fade, memories blur, but recordings remain. I downloaded an app onto my phone that afternoon and tucked a small camera near the kitchen counter, angled so it would catch both Kyle's careless smirk and Ava's rolling eyes the next time they decided to belittle me. I also pulled out the fireproof box where I kept my deed, retirement papers, and Linda's will. I checked each document carefully, then locked them back away. The house keys were recut, and the garage where I kept tools and records was fitted with a new padlock. On the kitchen table, I placed Linda's old expense ledger, the one she had used to track every grocery bill and utility payment. It sat there like a silent witness, a reminder that this home ran on accountability, not entitlement. Later that day, while collecting the mail, I noticed a padded envelope addressed to Ava. The label showed it came from a stationery supplier out of Salt Lake City. I wasn't in the habit of opening packages that weren't mine, but the return description printed faintly near the bottom caught my eye. Mobile Notary Kit. My stomach tightened. I snapped a photo of the shipping label and the tracking code before slipping the package onto the hall table. Whatever Ava planned, I now had proof of her preparations. That night, I lay awake listening to Rocket's claws click across the hardwood floor. The ceiling fan turned lazily overhead, moving warm air that smelled faintly of takeout. I thought about the way Kyle's words had landed in the kitchen, how they had shifted the balance of power in the house. But instead of despair, I felt a strange steadiness. They thought I was weak, tired, too old to resist. What they didn't know was that I had spent decades repairing electrical systems in storms, perched high on utility poles with wind and rain battering my back. I knew how to hold my ground when chaos struck. I rose quietly, padded into the kitchen, and checked the tiny camera I had installed earlier. Its red light blinked steadily, recording everything. On the counter sat Linda's ledger, its worn leather cover reflecting the dim glow of the nightlight. I touched it gently, almost as though touching Linda's hand, and whispered to myself that I would not be pushed aside. Out in the yard, the row of cedar trees swayed in the night wind, whispering of storms gathering on the horizon. I looked through the glass door at their dark outlines and felt the truth settle over me. A storm was indeed coming, but this time, I would be ready. If you're still here and sensing how quickly trust can be broken inside a family, comment 2 below to let me know you understand. Saturday afternoons used to be my quiet time. I'd walk down to the grocery store, buy a few staples, maybe a fresh pie from the bakery, and take my time heading home. The house had always felt like a refuge when I carried bags through the front door. But that day, stepping into the living room with my arms full of groceries, the atmosphere felt different, tight, tense, like the air before a thunderstorm. Kyle and Ava were seated on the couch, but they weren't alone. A man in a sleek gray suit sat across from them, one ankle crossed over his knee, a leather briefcase open on the coffee table. He stood as if we were old friends, extending a hand that I didn't take right away. "Mr. Grayson," he said smoothly, "I'm Richard Hale. I've been helping families with long-term planning for years. Your son and daughter-in-law asked me over to discuss some options for your future security." The bags of groceries dug into my palms. I set them down slowly, my eyes scanning the stack of papers spread out on the table, documents stamped with official-looking seals, words like asset transfer and durable power of attorney bolded in the headers. My stomach turned cold. Ava, all sweetness, chirped, "We thought this would make things easier, Ed. You don't want to be bogged down with complicated paperwork if you get sick. This way, everything's organized." Her tone was rehearsed, polished, but her eyes betrayed a glint of something sharper. Kyle, my own son, sat beside her, nodding as if this were a natural conversation to be having. He couldn't meet my gaze. "Sure, I follow," I said carefully, lowering myself into my recliner. My voice was steady, though my pulse thudded in my ears. "These are my affairs. Why would I hand them over to someone I just met?" Richard smiled, revealing teeth too white to be trusted. "Not hand over, Mr. Grayson, merely streamline. These documents authorize Kyle and Ava to act on your behalf in the event of illness, memory loss, or incapacity. It's a safeguard. Everyone does it these days." Incapacity. The word struck like a hammer. I thought of Linda's ledger on the kitchen table, her neat handwriting cataloging decades of careful living. To hear this stranger suggest I couldn't be trusted with my own life was like an insult to her memory. I leaned forward, pretending to study the papers. That's when I noticed a manila envelope at Richard's elbow, half unsealed. Inside, a form peeked out, stamped with the letterhead of a medical clinic I had never visited. My name was typed neatly at the top. Patient exhibits signs of cognitive decline, further evaluation recommended. I felt the ground shift under me. They weren't just pushing me towards signing away control, they were building a case that I was already unfit. Fake medical records, a script in progress. I steadied myself with a sip of water, forcing my voice into a mild, almost grandfatherly tone. "This all seems thorough, but I don't sign anything without reading it carefully. Linda and I always agreed on that. Give me a few days to look this over." Ava shifted, her smile cracking just a bit. Kyle cleared his throat but said nothing. Richard, though, pressed on with professional calm. "Of course, take your time, but I recommend acting sooner rather than later. Courts move quickly in these matters, and without preemptive action, you could face unnecessary delays if a medical emergency arises." I nodded as if I were grateful for his concern, even as fury coiled in my chest. My own son sitting there, complicit, letting this stranger imply I was a burden, a liability to be managed. The betrayal burned more deeply than I wanted to admit. Still, anger wouldn't serve me. What would serve me was evidence. I glanced toward the corner of the room, where the small camera I had installed earlier blinked faintly. It caught everything: Richard's pitch, Ava's manipulative words, Kyle's silence. Proof in my own home that this wasn't imagination. I rose, lifting the grocery bags again. "Well," I said evenly, "thank you for coming by. I'll go through the papers. We can talk more once I've had a chance." My tone was polite but final. Richard gathered his documents, sliding the manila envelope carefully back into his briefcase. "I'll be in touch, Mr. Grayson." His eyes lingered on me a moment too long, measuring, calculating. When the door finally shut behind him, I stood in the kitchen, unpacking bread and apples, with hands that shook only slightly. Ava muttered something about me being stubborn. Kyle disappeared into the den without a word. I stared at Linda's ledger on the table, the soft lamplight falling across its worn cover. They thought I was weak, that I would fold quietly, sign away my life because it was easier for them, but they didn't know me as well as they believed. The first blow had been struck, and though I didn't yet know the shape of the war to come, I whispered to myself as I stacked the groceries neatly in the pantry, "The storm has begun." If you're still watching and realize how dangerous silence can become when respect is lost, type 3 in the comments to show me you're following closely. The morning after Richard Hale's visit, I woke with a heaviness in my chest that no amount of coffee could shake. The house felt different now, less like a home and more like contested ground. I decided I couldn't sit idly by, waiting for the next ambush. I had to act, even if my first steps were small. At the public library downtown, the air smelled faintly of old paper and carpet cleaner. I chose a corner table away from the chatter of students and spread out a stack of books and pamphlets on elder law. Words like power of attorney, guardianship, and incompetency hearings glared at me from the pages. I read case studies of seniors whose children had petitioned to take control of their assets. The stories sounded eerily similar to my situation. Forged medical records, sudden claims of memory loss, signatures contested but upheld in court. The realization sent a cold shiver through me. What Ava and Richard had proposed wasn't just hypothetical. It was a well-worn tactic used to strip people of everything they had worked for. I closed the book slowly and thought of Linda. She had always believed preparation was protection. Maybe that's why I felt her presence most strongly in these quiet moments, urging me not to back down. That evening, I tried again with Kyle. I found him in the den, controller in hand, a football game flashing on the screen. I sat across from him and spoke softly, choosing my words with care. I told him what I had discovered at the library, that the papers Richard wanted me to sign could strip me of the right to decide anything about my life. I explained how such agreements could allow someone else to sell the house, drain accounts, even dictate my medical care. Kyle didn't pause the game. His jaw tightened, but he kept his eyes on the screen. "Dad," he said finally, "Ava's just trying to help. You're overthinking this. Don't make it harder than it has to be." It was as if I had been speaking to a stranger. The boy I had raised to value honesty and respect was gone, replaced by a man unwilling to confront the reality in front of him. My heart ached, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Son," I said quietly, "help doesn't come with hidden documents and forged doctors. That's not love, that's control." He shrugged, muttering something about stress, about me being suspicious. Then he turned back to his game, effectively ending the conversation. That night, while balancing my checkbook at the kitchen table, I noticed a line item on my credit card statement that nearly made my heart stop: a withdrawal of $15,000 from an account I rarely touched. I requested a copy of the transaction from the bank the next morning, and when the papers arrived, the signature was there in black ink. My name, but not my handwriting. I studied the loops of the letters, the uneven slant of the pen. Someone had signed my name with enough confidence to believe they could pass for me. My hands trembled as I held the document. It wasn't speculation anymore. It wasn't paranoia. They had already started siphoning away what I had earned. That evening, I confronted Ava in the kitchen, holding the paper out like an accusation. "Explain this," I said. She barely glanced at it before laughing softly. "Oh, Ed, you must have forgotten. You signed that last month. Remember? You said you wanted us to take care of things while you rested. Her voice dripped with feigned sympathy, but her eyes flashed with cold calculation. No, I said firmly. I never signed this. Her smile twisted into something sharper. Memory is a tricky thing at your age. Maybe you don't realize how confused you've been lately. The words cut deeper than I expected, and when Kyle entered, she wasted no time pulling him to her side. Your dad's upset, she told him, pressing a hand to her chest. He doesn't remember signing this. I'm worried about him. Kyle looked from her to me, uncertainty clouding his face. But in the end, he nodded at her explanation, choosing silence over confrontation. The betrayal sat heavy in my stomach. My attempt to appeal to reason had failed, and worse, they were rewriting reality in front of me, painting me as forgetful, unstable. I excused myself and retreated to my study. There, under the dim light of the desk lamp, I opened Linda's old notebook, the one she had used to track every expense. On its yellowed pages, I began my own record. Every strange package, every comment, every forged signature. I wrote it all down, as if Linda herself were guiding my pen. When I closed the book, the room was silent except for the ticking clock. I looked toward the dark window, my reflection staring back at me. Linda, I whispered, I won't let them take everything. Not while I still breathe. It was a promise to her and to myself. My first attempt at resistance had failed, but the war was only beginning. If you're still here and can see how the smallest wound can spiral into something much darker, comment 4 to let me know you haven't looked away. I came home later than usual that evening, carrying a folder of documents from the bank. The clerk had helped me track a string of withdrawals, and every page confirmed what I already knew. Someone was bleeding me dry under my own name. As I stepped into the house, the low murmur of voices reached me. They weren't just watching television, they were waiting. The dining room light was on. Papers lay spread across the table like a battlefield map. Ava sat straight-backed, her hair pulled into a sleek knot, eyes gleaming with determination. Kyle sat beside her, silent, his shoulders tight. And at the head of the table, as though he owned the place, was Richard Hale. His silver tie pin caught the light when he smiled. Mr. Grayson, he said smoothly, gesturing to the chair opposite him. We were just discussing the importance of resolving things quickly. Please, sit. We've prepared the necessary documents. I didn't sit. I set the folder from the bank down on the sideboard and kept my hands steady. What documents are those? Ava leaned forward, her tone sugar-coated. Ed, you've already signed once, but you must have forgotten. Remember the transfer last month? $15,000? You acted like you had no memory of it. That's why we need this safeguard. You're not remembering things the way you used to. Her words struck like darts. I watched Kyle's face, hoping for some flicker of shame, but he just stared at the table. Richard slid a stack of papers toward me. These are durable power of attorney agreements. If you sign them now, everything will be secure. If you don't, the courts could intervene. That would mean hearings, doctors' evaluations, a public declaration of incapacity. I doubt you want that humiliation. Something inside me snapped. For months I had endured their excuses, their entitlement, their theft. But now, with my son complicit and this stranger in my dining room dictating my life, the fire rose in me. No, I said, my voice sharper than it had been in years. I'm not signing anything. Ava's smile faltered. Ed, please don't be stubborn. We're trying to protect you. I slammed my hand down on the table, the papers scattering. Protect me? From what? From my own money? From my own house? You've been stealing from me, forging my name. And I know about the medical file in your briefcase, Richard. The one from a clinic I've never set foot in. Richard's jaw tightened. For the first time, the polished mask cracked. That file was prepared to ensure the court would believe your condition. He stopped himself, but the damage was done. I took a step closer, my eyes never leaving his. So, you admit it. You fabricated evidence. And every word of this little meeting, I tapped my pocket, is being recorded. You've just signed your own warrant. Ava's face drained of color. He's lying, she shrieked, turning to Kyle. He's twisting everything. He doesn't know what he's saying." But her voice wavered, and the tremor gave her away. Kyle shifted uncomfortably, caught between us, but still he said nothing to defend me. His silence was worse than shouting. It was consent. The room erupted in chaos. Ava's voice rose into a scream, insisting I was unstable. Richard gathered the papers in a fury, shoving them into his briefcase. Kyle pushed back his chair, pacing with his hands on his head, muttering that I was making everything worse. But I stood firm, the strength of my anger anchoring me. "This is my house," I thundered. "You think you can bully me into surrendering what's mine? You want to fight? Then fight, but I will not bow to you. Not today, not ever." The silence that followed was electric. Richard glared at me, his polished charm gone, revealing the predator beneath. Ava trembled, clutching Kyle's arm, whispering frantically in his ear. Kyle wouldn't look at me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. With one deliberate press, I stopped the recording app and held the phone up so they all could see. "Everything you said tonight is saved. Every threat, every lie, every admission. If you think you can paint me as senile, you'd better prepare for war, because I am ready." No one spoke. The only sound was the tick of the clock on the wall. I felt a strange calm spread through me. For the first time in months, the power was back in my hands. I gathered my bank folder, tucked it under my arm, and turned toward the hallway. This conversation is over. My lawyer will be in touch. Behind me, chairs scraped, voices rose again in protest, but I didn't turn back. In my study, I closed the door, leaned against it, and exhaled slowly. The line had been drawn. There was no turning back now. The storm was here, raging within my own home. But this time, I wasn't cowering before it. I was standing tall in its center, ready to fight. The house was quiet after the explosion of voices earlier that evening, but the silence felt more dangerous than the shouting. I sat alone in my study, the lamp casting a yellow glow over the stack of bank statements spread across the desk. The evidence of forged withdrawals and the fake medical file burned in my mind. Out in the living room, I could hear Ava and Kyle arguing in hushed, urgent tones. I didn't need to listen closely to know they were blaming me, twisting the story so I was the villain. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. Kyle was still my son, flesh of my flesh, the boy I had once carried on my shoulders to baseball games, the boy who used to beg me to fix his broken toys. Part of me longed to believe that he could wake up, shake free of Ava's grip, and remember who raised him. But another part of me, the part that had been keeping meticulous notes and hiding evidence, knew better. He had already chosen. By sitting silently while Richard threatened me, Kyle had shown where his loyalty lay. The weight of that truth pressed heavily on my chest. My mind drifted back to Linda. I could almost hear her voice from years ago, a memory resurfacing from one of our last conversations before her illness. She had told me, "Ed, if you ever lose respect in your own home, don't let anyone convince you to bow down. Dignity isn't optional, it's who you are." Those words echoed now, clear as if she were standing beside me. I rubbed my hands over my face. This was my turning point. Either I surrendered, signed those papers, and allowed them to dictate the rest of my life, or I fought. Fighting meant risk. It meant dragging Kyle into the mess, possibly losing him for good. It meant the painful possibility of my only son standing on the opposite side of a courtroom. But if I gave in, I would lose everything. My house, my independence, the legacy Linda and I had built together. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. After 2 rings, a firm, familiar voice answered. "This is Martha Green." "Martha, it's Ed Grayson," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. There was a pause, then a warmth crept into her tone. "Ed, it's been a long time. What's going on?" I told her everything. From the moment Kyle and Ava moved in, to Richard Hale's schemes, to the forged signature and the fake medical file. She listened without interruption, only the occasional sound of her pen scratching across paper. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. "Ed, you're in a dangerous position," she said. "If you sign those documents, you'll lose control of your assets and your medical rights. If you don't, they'll try to prove you incompetent in court. Either way, you're facing a fight. The question is, do you want to resist or do you want to surrender? The words hit me square in the chest. This was the choice, as clear as day. My throat tightened, but when I spoke, my voice was firm. I won't surrender, Martha. I want to fight, whatever it takes. Then we'll start immediately, she said. I'll need copies of all documents, bank statements, and any recordings you've made. And Ed, keep everything safe. Don't let them know how much you've gathered. Richard Hale has a reputation. He's been tied to similar cases in Oregon, but the victims didn't have proof. That's why he slipped through the cracks. If what you're telling me is accurate, this could be the case that ends him. Her words sent a surge of both fear and determination through me. I thanked her, and after we hung up, I sat for a long while in silence. I opened Linda's old notebook, the one with her careful handwriting in the margins. I wrote down Martha's name, the date, the decision I had just made. My hand shook, but my heart was steady. This was the moment I stopped being the cornered man in his own home. Before I went to bed, I wrote a letter. The words came slowly, painfully, but they had to be said. Kyle, I began, you are my son. I love you, but I cannot allow anyone, even you, to strip me of my dignity. If you continue to side with Ava and Richard, you will leave me no choice but to defend myself as if you were a stranger. I hope you remember the man I raised you to be, but if you don't, then you've chosen to walk away. I folded the letter and slid it into the drawer of my desk. My chest ached, but my resolve was solid. The house creaked in the night, and somewhere down the hall, Rocket barked once before falling silent again. I looked out the darkened window, past the row of cedars swaying in the Idaho wind, and felt something unshakable stir inside me. The choice had been made. The battle was no longer looming. It had begun. If you're still watching and the choices being made feel heavier than ever, type 6 in the comments so I know you're holding on through the storm. The house had become unbearable. The air was thick with silence, not the comfortable kind Linda and I once shared, but the suffocating quiet of people living under the same roof without trust. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, while Kyle and Ava occupied the living room with their constant phone calls and whispered conversations. They no longer pretended to include me in their lives. I was the outsider now, the obstacle to be removed. It didn't take long for Ava to go on the offensive. She began calling neighbors, lowering her voice just enough to sound fragile and believable. I overheard her once, sitting by the kitchen window with her phone pressed to her ear, telling Mrs. Anderson next door how concerned she was about me. She spoke of my supposed forgetfulness, my sudden temper, and how she feared for Kyle's safety living with me. I stood in the hallway, fists clenched, listening as she painted me into the role of a confused old man losing his grip on reality. The next day, one of my longtime friends from church called. His voice was polite but hesitant, laced with pity. Ed, we've been hearing some things. Are you doing all right? Maybe you should see a doctor, just to be safe. His words stung worse than any direct insult. Ava's campaign was working. My reputation, carefully built over decades of honesty and hard work, was being eroded by whispers. Kyle didn't stop her. He didn't even try. If anything, his silence screamed louder than her lies. I would catch him glancing at me when he thought I wasn't looking, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name, shame, perhaps, or maybe fear that I would call him out directly. But when it mattered most, when he could have defended me, he looked the other way. Then came the letter. It arrived in a thick white envelope with the seal of the Ada County Courthouse stamped in the corner. My hands trembled as I opened it at the kitchen table. Inside was a petition for emergency guardianship. Ava and Kyle had filed a request claiming I was no longer able to manage my finances or make rational decisions. They wanted legal control of my accounts, my house, my future. The words blurred as I read them. Each sentence cut deeper. Mr. Grayson displays evidence of cognitive decline. He has acted against his own best interest. Immediate guardianship is required to prevent financial harm. My own son's name signed at the bottom, beside Ava's. My breath caught, and for a moment, I thought my heart might give out. The consequences were immediate. The bank froze one of my retirement accounts until the court could make a decision. Bills that I usually paid on time were suddenly in limbo. A clerk from the bank, someone who had known me for years, called with a cautious tone, explaining it was just procedure, but I could hear the doubt in his voice too, as if maybe he believed the story. I tried to go about my daily routine, but everywhere I turned, I felt eyes on me. At the grocery store, Mrs. Anderson avoided my gaze. At church, one of the deacons patted my shoulder and asked if I needed help remembering my hymn number. The lies were spreading faster than I could stop them, and the walls were closing in. That night, I sat in my study staring at the petition. My chest felt heavy, but not from despair this time. Anger had replaced the sorrow. I had given my son everything, my time, my support, my love, and now he was letting his wife lead him into stealing not just my money, but my dignity. The phone rang suddenly, jolting me from my thoughts. The voice on the other end was low, hurried, almost whispered. "Mr. Grayson, you don't know me, but I need to warn you. My name is Ellen Parker. I was one of Richard Hale's clients." My grip tightened on the receiver. "Clients?" I asked. "Victims is the better word," she said bitterly. "He and his partners tried the same thing with me. They faked medical records, pushed me to sign over rights. I lost my home before I realized what had happened. I heard your name through a mutual contact, and I don't want you to fall into the palm trap." Her words confirmed everything I feared, that this wasn't just about my greedy daughter-in-law. This was a network, a pattern repeated over and over against people like me. I asked her for details, and she shared names, dates, and even the city where Richard had last operated. By the time we hung up, I had pages of notes scribbled in Linda's ledger. I closed the book and sat back, my heart pounding. They thought they had me cornered, that filing paperwork and poisoning my reputation would force me into submission. But now I had something stronger than fear. I had knowledge. I wasn't alone, and Richard Hale wasn't untouchable. I looked down at the petition again, the bold heading declaring their intent to strip me of everything. Slowly, deliberately, I folded it and placed it inside the ledger. My hand lingered on the worn leather cover, as though Linda herself were steadying me. "If they want a courtroom battle," I murmured into the empty room, "then I'll give them one. And when it's over, they'll wish they had never underestimated me." The envelope from the courthouse sat heavy in my desk drawer, its words still etched into my mind like a brand. For a few days, I drifted in a fog of anger and grief, but one morning I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. I couldn't let them dictate my story. If Kyle and Ava wanted to drag me into court, then I would walk into that courtroom, prepared to fight. I called Martha Green's office and scheduled a meeting for the very next day. The drive into downtown Boise felt different this time, not like a funeral procession, but like a march towards something inevitable. Martha welcomed me into her office with the same calm firmness she'd shown on the phone. The walls were lined with thick law books, and the air carried the scent of strong coffee and old leather. "Ed," she said, leaning forward, "I've looked over the petition. It's aggressive but not surprising. If they think they can paint you as incompetent, they'll win control. Our job is to prove not only that you're competent, but that they're the ones acting fraudulently." I handed her the stack of evidence I had gathered, the bank statements with the forged signature, the notes I'd written in Linda's old ledger, and most importantly, the video recording from my living room, where Richard had slipped up and admitted to fabricating medical records. Martha watched the recording twice, her expression unchanging except for the slightest arch of her brow when Richard said the damning words. When it ended, she looked at me squarely. "This is gold. If a judge sees this, Richard won't just lose. He could face charges, but we need more. The court will want clear medical evidence of your competency." She handed me the business card of a neurologist she trusted. "I want you to get a full cognitive assessment, independent, thorough, and admissible in court. We'll put it alongside your clean financial history and these recordings. It'll make their case crumble." The next week, I sat in a sterile office under bright fluorescent lights, answering memory tests and solving puzzles meant to gauge my focus. The doctor, a kind man with gray hair and a sharp gaze, asked about my daily routines, my finances, my understanding of current events. I answered every question with precision. At the end, he smiled. "Mr. Grayson, you're sharper than many men 20 years younger. There's nothing here to suggest cognitive decline." I left with a thick report in hand, my chest lighter than it had been in weeks. Martha received it with satisfaction. "Perfect. This will shut down any claim that you're unfit." But as she sifted through the rest of the evidence, she found something that made my stomach drop. Buried in a packet of real estate filings Ava had mistakenly left on the printer was a contract of sale for my home. The seller listed was me, Edward Grayson, though the signature line was blank. The buyer was a limited liability company with no real address, just a shell corporation. "They were preparing to sell your house before the court even ruled," Martha said grimly. "That means this guardianship petition was only step one. They planned to cash out quickly, before you had time to contest." I felt a fresh wave of betrayal wash over me. Ava and Richard hadn't just schemed to control my assets, they'd already plotted the endgame. And Kyle, my own son, had stood by while they laid the groundwork to strip me of the very roof over my head. Still, Martha's steady tone pulled me back from despair. "This is good for us, Ed. It shows premeditation. Judges don't like manipulation. And this document proves they weren't trying to protect you. They were trying to profit from you." I nodded slowly, absorbing her words. For the first time, the path ahead looked less like a trap and more like a battlefield, where I might actually stand a chance. That evening, driving home, I felt compelled to take a detour. Instead of pulling into my driveway, I turned toward the cemetery on the outskirts of town. The cedars swayed gently as I walked through rows of gravestones until I reached Linda's marker. I knelt, brushing leaves from the granite, and placed my hand on the cool stone. "All?" "Linda," I whispered, my voice breaking. "They've tried to break me. They've tried to take everything we built together. But I won't let them. I've chosen my path. I'll fight them with everything I have." The wind carried through the trees, rustling the branches like a quiet answer. I stayed there until the sun dipped low, letting the silence fill me with resolve. When I finally rose and walked back to the truck, the weight in my chest felt lighter. I wasn't walking into the unknown anymore. I had a plan, I had proof, and I had the fire of a man who knew exactly what was at stake. The fight wasn't over, it was only beginning. But now, for the first time in a long time, I believed I could win. If you're still here and can sense that a turning point is finally within reach, comment 8 below to let me know you're ready for what comes next. The day of the hearing arrived cold and gray, with clouds rolling over Boise like a warning. I dressed in my best suit, the one Linda had always said made me look dignified, and walked into the courthouse with Martha at my side. The building smelled faintly of varnished wood and coffee, and every echo of footsteps down the hallway felt heavier than it should have. My heart pounded, but my resolve was steady. I had come too far to falter now. When we entered the courtroom, I saw Kyle and Ava sitting at the opposite table. Ava looked polished, her hair immaculate, her face carefully painted into a mask of concern. Kyle sat beside her, stiff and pale, his hands clenched in his lap. And there, leaning back with his usual air of arrogance, was Richard Hale. He gave me a tight, knowing smile, as if the outcome were already decided. The benches behind us were filled with neighbors and acquaintances, some curious, some pitying. I could feel their eyes on me, remembering the rumors Ava had sown, that I was slipping, confused, no longer the man I once was. My throat tightened, but Martha gave me a reassuring nod. "Stay calm," she whispered. "The truth will speak louder than their lies." The judge entered, and the room rose. After formalities, Ava was called to testify. Her voice trembled just enough to appear genuine, as she painted a picture of me as a man unraveling. She spoke about the $15,000 withdrawal, claiming I'd forgotten authorizing it. She recounted moments where I'd supposedly repeated myself, raised my voice, misplaced bills. "We only want to help him," she said, her hand brushing Kyle's arm, but he doesn't realize how much he needs it. Richard followed, polished and confident. He described guardianship as a compassionate safety net. He spoke of my supposed decline as if it were undeniable fact, his words dripping with false empathy. At one point, he even gestured toward me, lowering his tone as though speaking about a fragile patient, rather than a man in full possession of his faculties. I sat still, my hands folded, while anger burned quietly inside me. Then it was Martha's turn. She rose calm and composed and began laying out our case piece by piece. First came the medical report from the neurologist, thick with professional detail. She read aloud the conclusion. Mr. Grayson shows no evidence of cognitive decline. He is fully competent. The words echoed in the courtroom, shattering the image Ava had tried to create. Next, Martha presented the video from my hidden camera. The screen flickered to life, showing Richard in my dining room, his voice cool and confident. Then the slip, his admission about preparing medical records so the court would believe. Gasps rippled through the spectators. Even the judge's expression hardened. Richard's composure cracked as he realized his own words had condemned him. Finally, Martha produced the contract for the sale of my house, already prepared in my name, but directed to a shell corporation. This was found among the petitioner's files, she said, holding it up. It demonstrates premeditation. They were not seeking to protect Mr. Grayson. They were seeking to profit from him. The courtroom buzzed. Ava's face drained of color. Kyle stared at the table, refusing to look up. Richard shifted uneasily in his chair, his earlier arrogance gone. Before the judge could respond, a woman stood from the gallery. It was Ellen Parker, the voice who had warned me over the phone. With the court's permission, she testified that Richard had attempted the same scheme with her years earlier. Fabricated medical records, fraudulent contracts, pressure to sign away control. Her testimony was the final nail. When she finished, the judge's voice cut through the room like a blade. The petition for guardianship is hereby denied. Furthermore, this court finds sufficient cause to open an independent investigation into the actions of Richard Hale and those who aided him. Mr. Hale, you may be facing criminal charges. As for the petitioners, Kyle and Ava Grayson, you are hereby warned that continued pursuit of fraudulent control over Mr. Grayson's estate will result in charges as well. The gavel struck once, sharp and final. For a long moment, the room was silent. Then murmurs rose, neighbors whispering, friends exchanging shocked looks. I stood slowly, my knees trembling but my head held high. People approached me, hands extended, voices apologizing for believing the lies. I shook each hand, though my heart was heavy with both relief and sorrow. As we left the courtroom, I saw Kyle lingering near the doorway. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed. He took a hesitant step toward me. "Dad," he began, his voice faltering. I looked at him, my son, the boy I once carried on my shoulders, now a man who had betrayed me. My heart ached with the weight of what had been lost. "Kyle," I said softly but firmly, "you made your choice." His lips trembled, but he said nothing more. I turned away, Martha steady at my side. Outside, the cold air filled my lungs, and for the first time in months, I felt free. The battle had been fought, and though the scars would remain, my dignity and independence were intact. "This road is mine," I whispered under my breath as the courthouse doors closed behind me. The house was quiet again. For the first time in months, I could sit in my living room without the weight of tension pressing down on my shoulders. The walls no longer echoed with raised voices or the constant undercurrent of suspicion. Instead, I heard the soft hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the old oak floorboards, and the whisper of wind against the windows. Peace had finally returned. I sat by the window, watching the early morning light pour across the garden. The tulips were blooming, red and yellow bursts against the rich green soil. For weeks I hadn't tended them, but now I made it a ritual. Kneeling down with dirt on my hands, I reminded myself that I was still capable, still strong, and still the master of my own home. Every bud was proof that life could return, even after harsh winters. The memory of the courtroom lingered like a vivid dream. I could still see Richard Hale's face twist when the evidence surfaced, still hear Ava's voice crumble under the weight of her own lies, and still feel the silence in the room when my lawyer revealed the recordings. That moment wasn't just about winning my freedom, it was about reclaiming my dignity. They had tried to strip me of my voice, to paint me as a man who had lost his grip on reality, and for a while, I feared others believed it. But I proved to them, and to myself, that I was not weak, not lost, not a man to be discarded. Kyle hadn't spoken to me since the trial. His absence was both a wound and a relief. I loved my son, but I could not ignore what he had allowed. His silence in the face of his wife's schemes, his willingness to benefit from my generosity without offering respect, those were choices. As a father, I mourned, but as a man, I knew love without respect is only another form of captivity. If reconciliation ever came, it would be on the foundation of honesty, not obligation. Neighbors stopped by more often now. They offered handshakes, pies, even quiet apologies for doubting me. One man down the street told me, "Ed, what you did gave me the courage to lock down my will. My kids are already circling, and I needed that push." Their words humbled me. What I had thought was only a battle for my house had become something larger, a warning, a spark for others to defend what they'd earned. One morning, a letter arrived from the district attorney's office. Richard Hale had been indicted on multiple counts of elder fraud and conspiracy. More victims had come forward after hearing about my case. My fight hadn't just saved me, it helped uncover a network of exploitation that might never have been exposed otherwise. I folded the letter and sat in silence for a long time. The weight of what nearly happened struck me all over again, but so did the strange comfort of knowing others were being protected because I refused to back down. In the evenings, I began writing again. My late wife Linda had always encouraged me to keep a journal, though I rarely did. Now, words poured from me as naturally as breath. I wrote about betrayal, about boundaries, about how love for family should never excuse cruelty. I wrote about resilience, the kind you only discover when you're pushed to the edge. And I wrote about dignity, that final inheritance every man must guard for himself. The house no longer felt lonely, it felt like mine again. I arranged Linda's photos back on the mantle, polished the frames, and sat in my favorite chair with her smile watching over me. I spoke to her sometimes in the quiet. "I'm still here, love. They tried, but I'm still standing." When I thought about the future, it no longer seemed clouded by fear. If predators came again, I knew how to fight. If family came, I knew how to set boundaries. And if Kyle ever walked through that door, I would greet him as a father, but not as a man willing to be diminished. Respect would be the price of re-entry. Looking out the window, I whispered words that felt like both an oath and a conclusion. If you don't like living with me, then leave. But don't think you can take from me what I built with my own hands. Respect is not optional, not in this house, not in my life. And with that, I closed my journal, laid my pen on the desk, and let the sunlight spill across the pages. I was older, yes, but I was unbroken, proud, and no one's victim. These lessons are meant to inspire you to live fully and authentically. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Take a moment to reflect and share one thing you've learned and plan to apply in your own life. Let's support each other on this journey toward embracing these truths. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment with 1. If not, feel free to comment with 0. Your feedback means a lot to us. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and here's to living life on your own terms.